So welcome. Thank you for participating in this webinar and training in multilingual space today. My name's Emil Rudisell. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a program manager with Forge. As an image description, I'm a white genderqueer person with blondish hair and a beard sitting in front of some framed artwork. Today's webinar is trauma-informed approaches to addressing hate violence. So we're going to be looking at exactly that throughout the next hour and a half. As we get started, I just want to say welcome to everybody. Thank you all so much for being here. Please, throughout this training, take care of yourself. Your lives, your hearts, your joys, your sorrows, are all welcome here, and we care for them and want you to care for them. There's a picture on the screen of one of our coworkers, Christina, sitting on a giant pile of fresh compost for her garden. And I love that image and metaphor for sort of how we still find ways to take care of ourselves, to find joy, whether it's in gardening, nature, whatever, despite all of the stuff that needs to get composted around us. We will use the chat a lot today, hopefully. If you want to go ahead, we've gotten some language access instructions in the chat, but please say hi. Tell us about yourself, use an emoji to describe your day. Just let us know who's here in the chat, and we'll keep using that for discussion throughout. This is being recorded. We'll get it all posted online. So if you need to miss anything, take a break, anything like that, you will have access to the materials later on. So a little bit about Forge. We are 30 years old. Happy birthday to us this past June. And started in Milwaukee. I see a hi from Milwaukee in the chat. And now is national, providing primarily training and technical assistance to service providers and organizations to help support trans and non-binary survivors of violence. We do a small sliver of our work is still direct service with survivors. We have staff kind of around the country. I am that dot in Florida. So hello from Florida today. Forge works on these guiding principles: trauma-informed, empowerment-based, and being culturally responsive. So we strive for all of our work to understand the complexities of trauma, to prevent re-traumatization, and to support agency, choice, and collaboration and empowerment, both for survivors and for service providers. So one example, you have choice in how you participate today. If you're a listen and learn kind of person, if you're a ask lots of questions or share lots of examples in the chat kind of person, we support that choice. We also know trans people are super diverse, have lots of different things that impact our cultural identities and that we're bringing to the table. So we strive to make sure that our programs and our services are culturally responsive to a wide variety of cultures. We are also grateful to our funders. This training is funded by the Office of Justice Programs. And this is the disclaimer they want us to put up there, just saying that the views in this training are ours and not theirs. All right. So the plan for today, we're going to start with some of the hard stuff with looking at what is trauma, what's the landscape of anti-trans hate in the world right now, then move on to tools for safety and well-being, look at assessing our programs. So whatever kind of work you do, how can you incorporate trauma-informed care and services and be thinking about anti-trans hate or other forms of hate violence, and end with some next steps. I would like to launch this poll first. So just a couple questions to get to know y'all. How familiar are you with trauma-informed care? And have you spoken with survivors about hate violence? So that could be you've worked with survivors of hate violence specifically, or you work with survivors of intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and other kind of violence, and you've spoken to them about hate violence. I'm gonna give it like 30 more seconds. There are no wrong answers. We'll say yesterday we got up to 80%. So if y'all want to be competitive, we're at 73% right now. 75. Okay. We'll share at 75. Oh, we got to 78. I should have given you another second. Good job though. Awesome. So y'all are really familiar with trauma-informed care, which is exciting to me to have a really lively discussion. For folks who feel a little bit familiar, fairly familiar, I'm guessing you still have so much expertise and ideas that you can bring in and examples, and all of us are constantly learning. So we're in this learning together. And it looks like the majority of folks have spoken to survivors, at least occasionally with spoken with survivors about hate violence, at least occasionally. So, we may bring in some types of questions or examples. Please, if you do share any examples in the chat, make sure that folks are not identifiable and you're not sharing anything that, would violate any sort of confidentiality, just kind of maybe a big picture they needed help with housing, or I was concerned about how to do X, Y, and Z type of thing. All right, thank you all. Great to have you here. Thank you for introducing yourselves. Thank you for letting me scroll really fast. Okay, so what is trauma? This preface this slide is always like interesting to write. Having done years and years of training people about trauma, it's like there's no one perfect, very good definition. And in fact, the ways that we in the United States have understood trauma, particularly in like kind of mainstream psychology, have changed really dramatically over the past 50 or 60 years. So definitions are changing, getting more nuanced. So please don't take this as the ultimate say in what trauma is, but an example. Trauma is when we experience very stressful, frightening, or distressing events that are difficult to cope with or out of our control. It could be one incident or an ongoing event that happens over a long period of time. So often you originally kind of, again, mainstream psychology started thinking of trauma, particularly related to soldiers' experiences of war. And when people started studying that, they were seeing massive amounts of similar impacts on survivors of sexual violence and other types of interpersonal violence. So since then, we've really come to understand that there's a lot of stuff that happens in our world and in our lives that can have a traumatic impact. And we also know it's not just like one-time singular events. It can be a one-time singular event, or things that cause trauma can be a lot of things over time, or even, sort of a culture atmosphere that you live in. And it's important within that to think about like what happens when trauma doesn't end. So some of those, kind of more mainstream ideas of trauma that do look at singular events, hopefully, ideally, the event ends at some point in time. This quote is from Ayanna Abrams and is from an article particularly looking at racial chronic stress and trauma and its impact on mental health. So Ayanna writes, when you don't feel safe in certain environments, whether it be your workspace, your neighborhood, or your religious group, or things in your community, all of those things can add up to this cumulative stress and tension that your body is holding because you don't feel safe. You're also engaging in a lot of mental labor because you're trying to seek safety all of the time. So trauma can look like the the impact of the neighborhoods we live in. It can look like racism, generational trauma, systems of oppression, constant, micro and macro aggressions that are attacking us, and this feeling that like you're not safe in the world, and those have really big long-term effects. Um, Michael, do you want to hop on and read this quote?
I sure can. So Stacey Hines in the Politics of Trauma writes, if we do not understand and integrate the shaping power of institutions, social norms, economic systems, oppression, and privilege, alongside the profound influences of family and community, we will not fully understand trauma or how to heal from it. We will not understand how to prevent it.
Thank you. Um, yeah, and there's the name of the book in the chat for you. Sometimes it's hard to find these quotes because there's so much like this. There's an entire book about the politics of trauma. There are dozens of books about generational trauma, historical trauma, the impact of trauma across the lifespan. Um, so we want to kind of give these highlights to you, but no, there's a lot more for all of us to learn. And when we think about it, uh, so this feels pretty foundational. And as we're going to start in a little bit looking at trauma-informed care, we want to be considering all of these things that Stacey names of social norms, institutions, economic systems, in how we provide care and how we think about what causes trauma and what causes harm. And feel free again to share in the chat other things you found helpful in learning about your understanding of trauma, or that you would add to these little snippets of what trauma is. So we're talking about trauma, and we're also talking about anti-trans hate. There's a lot of it going on right now. And we've sort of been looking at these different bubbles of hate that really overlap. So state-sanctioned hate is hate that's coming from the government, the state, the legislation, cultural movements, law enforcement, media. It's often institutionalized and systemic. Hate violence, there's the traditional kind of hate crimes that fall under there, things that are motivated by people attacking someone based on their identity. There's also a lot of hate violence that, maybe doesn't fall into the FBI's category of hate crime, but is still violence targeted against somebody for their identity, microaggressions, constant discrimination, harassment. We've completed a study with trans folks around their experiences of hate violence, that was finished after making these slides. So we don't have the stats in the slides, but the experiences of hate violence are really, really overwhelmingly large in trans and non-binary communities right now. And that's just, kind of looking at hate violence related to trans identities. You also add on that people are experiencing these kinds of hate and attacks based on other identities that they hold to, race being a huge one. And we're seeing also that there are attacks on organizations. So it's not just individuals that are experiencing violence, but organizations are being, facing property destruction, having their buildings defaced or windows smashed, as well as, constant virtual harassment, losing funding, all sorts of other types of attacks. And these things are really connected to each other in this framework. So they reinforce and they build on each other, and each act of hate isn't, sometimes it falls in multiple categories. If you came to our training yesterday, you saw this slide, but for those who didn't, we want to look at, like, when we look at state sanctioned hate, there's attacks coming from like a lot of different angles uh, within policy and legislation that's being pushed out against trans people, against LGBTQ folks. And that looks like helping to erase people from schools and public life, making barriers to creating change. So you may have heard about like mask bans or laws that make it more difficult to protest or more difficult to vote. In some places, there are even laws saying it's okay to hit protesters with your cars. Like lots of really violent and creepy kind of legislation that makes it harder for folks to make progress and make change. Enshrining inequality, so putting discrimination into law or increasing the ways it's already written into law, criminalizing transition, banning healthcare access, banning education related to trans folks, banning use of bathrooms or other facilities for trans folks, and then silencing supporters. So people who are speaking up and out about anti-trans legislation are, potentially losing their jobs, getting fired, facing all sorts of harassment. So these strategies kind of pile together to make all of the legislation have this really huge impact. And these five kind of ways of framing what state-sanctioned hate looks like come from the Movement Advancement Project, and they wrote a longer report about it in 2023. So this is already a year and a half ago, and we're seeing just even higher volumes of all of this stuff since they wrote this report. And I see it in the chat, someone says Project 2025 in progress. And yeah, if you've spent time either, looking at the topics in Project 2025 or reading the whole thing, you can see it's targeting not just trans people and LGBTQ people, but Department of Education, housing rights, climate, like any action to stop climate change, making it harder to make change, harder to vote, all of these things that really would, in theory, mean that we would have a good democracy. Are there other types of anti-trans actions that y'all are seeing or hearing about that you want to share in the chat? I know I gave just the briefest of overviews. If a pause. I can say while people are typing, what we're seeing is a lot of increases in all types of violence, increases in discrimination, in microaggressions that people are facing from friends, family, workplaces, dirty looks when you're out and about in the world, as well as more and more stories of people being followed, harassed, things like that, and a huge volume of virtual and online attacks. Yeah, so teachers outing their students' identities to parents, that's a huge one. So young people are losing a lot of rights to healthcare, rights to privacy, rights to explore their gender through these laws and policies. And trans investigators, I'm not familiar with that term, but my guess would be it kind of links to the next one of the policing of bodies in sports and Olympics, particularly folks who are competing on women's teams, whether it's the Olympics or your local high school volleyball team or things like that. Yeah, people are great. Okay, so trans investigators is like what's going on with Imran Khalid. Who is an Algerian boxer in the Olympics, if you're not familiar, who people said that she didn't have the right to be competing, and like made her prove prove that she was a woman in order to keep competing. So really, really gross assessments of people's bodies. Yeah, thank you all for sharing more of that in the chat. Please keep talking there. So what we know and what we see is that when inequality goes up, violence goes up. So we're seeing that. We're seeing a culture of increased harassment and discrimination, and it's leading to more physical violence and assaults. In this circle, we've got oppression at the center, and around that, hate violence, hostile culture, sexual violence and intimate partner violence, discrimination, harmful disinformation. A lot of lies are being spread about who trans people are, that are then, leading to people being discriminated against, people being afraid of being discriminated against, denied resources, things like that. Trans people aren't the only people who experience this. As we've shared in the chat, there's NRCDB has created a technical assistance guide to look at a web of trauma, particularly related to Black women survivors of intimate partner violence. And it's a great resource for really kind of digging deep into those connections between oppression, in particular racism and sexism, and multiple forms of trauma and their impact. So just another resource so you can see how movements are linked to in your work. So we'll shift now to looking at like, what does trauma-informed approach mean? We've looked, that was a brief overview and of kind of the state of hate and trauma and violence right now. We have been doing additional webinars on state-sanctioned hate, on culture wars. So if you're curious kind of to learn more in depth about any of the things I just talked about, please join us at other webinars, check out our recordings, things like that. So trauma-informed. SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health something administration, has done a lot of writing about like what it means to be trauma-informed. And their language is some stuff that's easy and accessible to kind of get into and start digging into what it means to be trauma informed. Again, this is one framework. What it means to be trauma informed is often a huge process that means different things to different people, and is something that you dig into as an agency with each person that you're working with, because trauma has different impacts, and we need to plan and prepare for it in different ways. So this is kind of like an outline and shouldn't be the only set of rules that you follow in your work, if that makes sense. So the 4 R's listed here start with realization about trauma and how it can affect people and groups. Then recognizing the signs of trauma. So we talked about like what trauma is, that it has a big impact on people. What are some of the signs that people have experienced trauma? What are some of the ways it impacts and manifests in individuals and in communities? And then how can a system respond to trauma? So systems can be, big systems. They can also be like our organization, the agency that you work at, or the program that you're a part of, or the support group that you run. How can you respond to trauma? And in doing so, resist re-traumatization. I think they tried really hard to get the R's in here. But the idea is that we want to recognize and understand that trauma has widespread impacts on people. We want to have a sense of what those impacts are so that we can plan ahead and prepare to support people. and so that we can hopefully not do more harm. Those are kind of the ideas behind this. So what we've done at Forge and what I want to look at today is we took kind of these approaches and some of the other principles and ideas behind trauma-informed care and said, well, what does this mean in our work on hate violence? This is background, the past few years, Forge has been doing a lot more intensive work around the impacts of hate violence, what kind of hate violence is happening in the world, how to support survivors, what service providers need to know. And it's a lot. And we're finding it impacts our staff, it impacts survivors, it impacts service providers. Um, and, and, and so we want to really think about like, how do we frame how we work internally around this and how do we put stuff out into the world? And how can we help other people frame it, knowing how widespread the impacts of hate are? So that's where we're going with this. So the first are realization, right? Realizing the widespread impact of trauma. Hate violence is traumatic. This feels like a very obvious statement, but sometimes it's not always stated so plainly, right? Like we live in this world where there's hate all around us all of the time. And because it's so much there, sometimes it can be hard to realize that it's having a huge effect on us, because we're like, well, I don't really remember being safe from this hate. Um, so we think it's important to name that like this does have an impact on everybody and on our communities. That includes state-sanctioned hate, that includes legislation, policies, culture, as well as interpersonal violence, and kind of what's in the media, this like culture of disinformation and misinformation. They all contribute to trauma experiences. And that people don't have to directly experience an event to be affected by it. So hearing about anti-trans hate, hearing about legislation has a negative impact on people. We found that in research that we've been doing, kind of confirmed what we hear from communities that we're a part of all of the time. Many of y'all, maybe work in sexual domestic violence, or other anti-violence agencies. You might be familiar with this principle in thinking about secondary trauma, right? Many of us who are helping professionals of some kind or just caring people in the lives of others, we're impacted by the people around us and what they go through. We also know in this, like, putting a framework around trauma is that historical trauma and institutional trauma have ongoing impacts on trans and non-binary people's lives and community. So again, just that reminder that trauma is not just a single event, and it's not just what's happening right now in the world, it's what's happened over hundreds of years. And it's the way that discrimination is built into the institutions and the world that we live in that cause harm as well. So we want to look at, there's a widespread impact. How does it impact people? Uh, there's a lot of information out there about the impacts that trauma has on our brains, our bodies, our relationships, our ability to build connections. So this is kind of a simplified short version of that again, right? Like people study trauma for lifetimes. So there's tons more to it. In general, trauma can decrease our ability to manage and regulate our feelings, have the energy to get things done, to self-soothe, to trust other people, thoughtfully plan, or to tell stories. So, for example, people who've experienced trauma may have trouble with their memory, both their memory of traumatic events, but their kind of day-to-day memory as well, which can impact, being able to say, here's what happened to me. your brain may also form connections in different ways so that stories that we tell about traumatic experiences aren't always linear. They sometimes include things that happened, years separate from that experience because it's important internally to us. But that can be confusing to people on the outside. Trauma can have a negative impact on our executive functioning, which is kind of the planning, calendaring, task-oriented part of our brain. So folks may have a hard time with like following up on appointments, making phone calls, figuring out what steps they need to take in order to get connected to a support service. All those kind of things are decreased. The other side, we have what gets increased. Well, the likelihood of tension, anxiety, panic all increase, as well as emotional volatility. So that's like having big feelings and having rapid changes in our emotion. So if I'm working in a field where I know I'm working with a lot of folks with trauma, I'm going to assume that anxiety will be present, um, and kind of plan the day, the program, the activity based on the fact that like folks likely are feeling anxious. That doesn't mean every single person will feel tension and anxiety all of the time, but there's a higher likelihood of it than if I was working with a group of people who had not experienced trauma. Avoidance and disassociation are other big ones. This can look like, when we're thinking about services, not returning phone calls, missing appointments. Disassociation can mean like having a hard time describing your feelings, or like really having our brains, our minds kind of leave the space that we're in and not be present anymore. Increased likelihood of the use of drugs or alcohol to cope and self-soothe, and that people may have trauma reminders or what are called triggers, so things that will bring them back to moments of experiencing the trauma. So when I think about being trauma-informed, even with just a small list of trauma reminders, what I want to do with my program is plan for this. I'm going to plan like folks may have a harder time trusting people. So I need to do more to show that I'm trustworthy. Folks are having trouble thoughtfully planning and also possibly experiencing higher levels of avoidance. I'm not going to punish people if they're late to an appointment. Like that's not going to build my trust. That's not going to create safety. And I know it's probably likely that folks are going to miss things and struggle with that. And again, would love to hear other impacts of trauma that y'all are hearing. If there's anything I haven't named you want to bring into the space, anything like that. So we mentioned, again, what we want to do in our work and what we hope that others do too is recognize that trauma affects everyone. So that's survivors as well as our staff, our service providers, helping professionals, our loved ones and people who care. So what we're seeing is that survivors of violence, of all different forms of violence, are experiencing an increase in traumatic experiences and trauma responses. And the kind of the culture of anti-trans hate is increasing that level of distress and giving people more reminders of other experiences of trauma they've had. So it's like reinforcing and perpetuating this trauma. We're seeing increase of distrust, inability to access other services. So with anti-trans hate, a lot of services are being taken away from people, legislated out of existence. Healthcare providers are having a harder time providing the care they need to. Librarians and teachers are getting threatened, with losing their jobs if they're nice to trans people. All sorts of things are happening. We're also seeing a lot of polyvictimization, so people experiencing multiple forms of harm across their lifetime. Staff, service providers, volunteers, caring folks are experiencing exhaustion. That's huge. Just everybody's tired and getting burnt out and staying burnt out. Um, Seeing more distrust of others, distrust of our colleagues, of partner organizations, disruption of work. We're no longer able to provide services in the same way that we used to be. We're having to, stop saying certain things, or we're afraid that we might have to do that in the future, and that's impacting our work. Folks are experiencing harassment and attacks, and organizations are being targeted. So there is a lot of stuff kind of going on for all of us all of the time. Um, Really widespread impact. So I just scrolled through too many slides. Okay. So respond. Um, we want to use trauma-informed approaches when we respond. And that's both like when we're working directly with survivors of any type of violence or people who've experienced trauma, as well as things like this training, all of the materials that we write, and hope that other organizations, agencies, service providers are really thinking through all levels of our work. We want to be trauma informed. To do that, that means we need to plan ahead, right? We want to look at what do our services look like? How can we think about, somebody has increased anxiety, less trust in systems. What can we do to create services where that person may be more likely to feel welcome or like they can access our services? So kind of to make that concrete, if I know that folks have a lot more anxiety, a lot of trouble kind of managing time, and are honestly like afraid to leave their houses because of the danger that's happening. um, I might plan ahead and think about like, well, can we offer virtual services as well as in-person services? Can we offer drop-in hours, whether virtually or in person, or have like you often a lot of agencies already have, but if you don't have 24-hour have hotlines where folks who aren't able to make appointments can still get the support that they need, and call in. People who don't want to leave their homes, who have like a safe space in their home, can get the service virtually. And that might be one way that we plan ahead. We want to lean into complexity. While some things might feel like quick answers, like yes, people can access us by phone, by Zoom, or in person, great. We also know that there's a lot of complexity in how people respond to trauma. And we want to acknowledge that many of the ways people respond can be both hurtful and helpful, to themselves and to others. So thinking about how can we use a harm reduction framework, to validate folks' responses, to honor what's helped you survive so far, and support them if they have identified that they want to change the skills that they're using, the ways that they're handling trauma. Um, yeah, I see in the chat, people traumatized, may keep being in traumatic situations and not know who they are when they're safe. So it can kind of be a scary process to think about, like, well, what would it look like if I wasn't afraid? Um, and so like leaning into that complexity with people and being able to hold that, um, hold that, somebody may be yelling or cursing or doing drugs, and needs our support and services and wants them. And then we want to value the individual and the group. Um, so we, know that we want to help kind of build connection. Um, Connection is something that is really healing from trauma. When we can have positive relationships and positive supports from others, that can be a huge part of healing. Um, but sometimes there are conflicts between the needs of like an individual and a group. An individual needs to share a particular story, perhaps, and the group is like, I can't share these details right now. So we want to value both of those things and navigate the situation to find ways that everybody can have their needs met. We think about that, as we're doing trainings, for example. We know there's lots of different ways that people feel safer in learning into training. So we try to have different ways that each person can learn. We try to give, some heads up around content while knowing that like we don't know every single person in the room and what's going to be best for them. So a little bit of trusting people also to care for themselves. The other piece on the side is that FAMSA offers, these trauma-informed principles. So when you're doing the work of responding using trauma-informed approaches, thinking about safety, transparency, trustworthiness, collaboration, agency, and culture. So those ideas can be really beneficial, and I will come back to them in a bit, to think about like, how do we actually do what we do? Whether it's one-on-one advocacy with someone, a support group, a training, um, shelter services, all of that different stuff. How are we supporting safety? How do we have transparency, collaboration, and how do we make sure there's space for folks' culture in the discussions that we're having? That that was a lot. How are y'all doing? Let's see some reaction buttons in the chat, emojis. Maybe take a breath and stretch. I get lots of thumbs up and hearts. Great, thank you. Right. So, want to add into this the idea of healing engagement. I know some folks have done work, and unfortunately, I've just been to trainings on it and not found a link for y'all, but around the concept of healing engagement, uh, um, most as like a next step beyond trauma informed care. Um, the when we're doing trauma informed work, when we're doing healing work, we want to make sure that we see the whole of who folks are or the whole of who they want to share with us, and not limit them to just the traumatic experiences in their life. There's potential that if you focus too, if you're thinking about trauma informed care a lot, you might just see trauma all the time, everywhere. Folks are way more than that. Um, so, when I think about healing engagement, connection is a huge important part of that. Uh, Folks do well with connection, connection to ourselves. So both healing from trauma as well as just like living a good and beautiful life. When we're connected with ourselves and we can have an internal sense of like who we are, what brings us joy, what makes us sad, what we want, all of those things. And some of our healing techniques really help people with that. Might be like grounding activities that help people come back to the present, or to their bodies. Um, Grounding techniques that really connect to the bodies can be hard for some trans folks who have history of not being okay with parts of their bodies or trauma histories related to body parts. So be thoughtful about how you connect there. But it can be things like using your five senses, or feeling positive touch, um, things like that. Connection that's important is also connection to our communities, to supportive others. There's a lot of research around how kids heal from trauma. And it's like, if you've got a supportive adult in your life, that is huge. The more supportive adults, the better. But we I just like can't overstate the value of having supportive, caring community um, in our lives, whether it's friends, family, coworkers, a connection to a sense of like trans and non-binary community, other people. Um, we also know that nature is really healing for folks, and connection to nature. Um, as folks have been saying, touch grass. Um, but there is also, if you're into the science research, there's a ton of research around um, how nature can help us heal. Being in the woods, hearing birds, touching grass, gardening, whatever it is, and there's just like really amazing stuff around how humans need that. And then we also need connection to something bigger than ourselves. And that's really broad in what it means. For some people, it's faith and spirituality that has been really healing. For some people, it's a sense of purpose or their values. For some people, it's connected back to community, but kind of in the broad sense of like cultural community or an identity or history. But having that connection can be really important to us. So when we're doing trauma-informed work, what we can do is help promote and support engagement with healing um, through all of these different aspects in whatever ways we want. Um, and I'm looking at the chat. I hope y'all are following along with the great conversations there. Yeah, I see, that thank you for bringing this up. So a lot of this hatred of trans people, denying of healthcare, it's not new. The moment feels particularly like heightened right now, but as we're reminded in the chat, the first wave AIDS era also had a lot of those same kind of tactics being used against trans folks, queer folks. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Right. And then resisting re-traumatization. So here, we want to do things that like avoid re-traumatizing people. That one clear example of that is storytelling. I have kind of a scale here because we're balancing two things that are both true, but may feel like they're contradictory. So on one side, telling our stories can be really healing. Um, a lot of folks have said that they have gotten so much out of being able to tell their story, to be heard. Stories can also be traumatizing. A lot of people have said that retelling what happened to them was awful. Um, some folks find it traumatizing to hear stories of violence and harm. Some folks find it healing because they can build, maybe in part because they're building connection and they're like, I'm not alone in this. Other people have been through it too. So both of those things are true. An example of how this shows up in programs is, for example, in a support group, um, some folks may really want to tell their stories. And I've heard a few people say, like, this group wouldn't let me talk about what happened. And that sucked. I felt isolated and silenced. Um, and I hear from a lot of like facilitators and people in support groups that it's been really valuable to not get too deep in stories, because they can be so overwhelming to both the individual and the group, when you don't know what's going to happen and how people are going to react. So there's not like one right answer for every single group and every single person. We instead have to navigate, what do we share and when. With our trainings, we think about this a lot. How much detail do I share about all of the violence in the world? What stories do we tell, and how can we tell them in a way that aren't going to cause further harm to people listening? Right. So your turn again. What are you and your community doing? Whether it's your broader community, your work community, what are you doing to provide trauma-informed responses or to manage trauma responses? And Michael, I'll ask you if you're around to hop back on and let me know, did I miss anything in the chat?
I think you have captured what was posted publicly in the chat, so that's great. Thank you.
Great. Great. We've had the first response to this question that I can see. Writing the story in your own hand can be healing. Yeah. And that's, uh, I love this kind of thinking back on the last slide about like how stories can both be healing and potentially traumatizing. There, different stuff works for different people. So writing it in your own hand, some people get a lot out of like tearing the story up after they've written it down. Some people get a lot out of being like, this is mine. I'm not telling anyone. And like, I get to own that this is like my private business. And that can feel really empowering, the like saying no to sharing. Um, yeah, burning the story. Great. Um, Other examples in the chat, gatherings around art, food, creativity, not just protesting and grieving. I love that. Um, the picture on the screen right now is from Milwaukee Pride Fest. Forge has done like a photo booth there. So, as y'all can tell, we do a lot of anti-violence work. We also try to make like our in-person events be fun and joyous and celebratory to kind of capture that like broad range of trans experiences. We hold all of this at once. I appreciate this. Trauma response has tended to be watching Heartstopper. I also watch a lot of Heartstopper. Y'all haven't seen it. It's so sweet and tender. And there's, yeah, rewatching television shows, finding the stories. I think for me with Heartstopper, it's like finding stories where people actually get to have like love and celebration in a way that not all of us did. Um, Sometimes the most healing things are like, yeah, those positive images in TV or movies. Great. Thank you all. Keep your ideas coming. Um, okay, 30 minutes left. So what Forge has been doing as we're thinking about hate violence and trauma-informed services and what we're offering for y'all is really thinking about and assessing our programs. And this can be, again, any different type of program that you do. So some questions that have been helpful for us are, what values does your work embody? And then what do these values look like in action? What is your understanding of trauma and its impacts? How does your work support healing and connection? Where is there potential in your work for re-traumatizing people, and how can you minimize that impact? Um, we're in the process of like writing out our answers to all of these questions and like a document to share. It's not ready yet, but if you sign up for our listserv, you'll know when it is ready. So I'm sorry I can't share like the full scope of our answers, but one example that I could kind of talk through is when thinking about values, we talked about like looking at those SAMHSA ideas of safety, collaboration, trust, transparency, um, and um, and more. And then said like, well, what does that mean to us? Because right, safety means different things to different people. And what does it look like when we do that? So for example, under safety, kind of a draft version of this is that our values are safety looks different for everyone. We work to keep harm from happening and create a space for curiosity, learning, and engagement with materials. Harm and discomfort are different. So, what that looks like in action is that we can do things like provide safety resources such as hotlines, coping strategies, safety plans, other tools for building safety for people that are empowerment based. We can provide space for grounding activities during webinars. We can offer choice at the beginning of webinars, remind people to take care of themselves. We record things so people can watch it later. Um, and have backup staff like Michael is my backup today to help watch the chat. Social media is another place that we are a lot, and our social media has been getting a lot of hate comments, as is everybody's. But we want our social media to be a safe place that people can engage and connect with us. So it's a priority to us that we find tools to moderate, and take turns as staff moderating, because our safety and our well-being matters too. So it's not all on one person to delete those comments, but they should be deleted so that the place is safe for everyone else. So that's just kind of like one example of how we've talked through one specific value, and we're still doing it. It's like an ongoing process. So I encourage y'all to think about it too. The second kind of set of questions, how will this program, activity, agency, whatever it is, account for the ways that people have already experienced trauma and may be engaging from places of trauma? So that kind of links back to what I talked about earlier. How do we, think about the impacts that people are bringing in, the ways that they may engage and connect with us, that are connected to trauma responses, and how do we prepare ahead of time about that? And then how do we really embody these principles around trustworthiness, transparency, collaboration, and safety? You may use different principles, you may use different values, or have additional ones that you want to add in. But thinking through our work, planning ahead, is really helpful. Oftentimes we might find there's a lot of stuff we're already doing a good job about, but maybe we didn't realize or name that we were doing it to be trauma informed. But when we name it that way, that can help us get more nuanced and help us, really think through where there might be gaps or places that we want to do things a little bit differently. And I have one other example I want to share with y'all. So let's see if I can zoom this in for you. Again, I live in Florida. Equality Florida created years ago this guide, a trauma-informed care resource map for LGBTQ youth. And I'll share that link in a second. And they took those principles and the green boxes, so like safety, and then they made a list of actions. So this is focused on schools, right? And young people. So safety for them, children and adults feel physically, psychologically safe. The physical setting is safe. Interpersonal actions promote a sense of safety. And so some of their action ideas are safe space stickers, affirmative support groups in the community, staff presence at, quote, hotspots throughout the school, being alerted prior to suicide awareness events, displaying posters with LGBTQ role models, and so on. And they did this for each of these things: voice, choice, transparency, and some things overlap, right? Things that promote safety may also promote predictability, stuff like that. But it's just another great way to visualize how we can do these things. And yeah, it is especially tragic. Like, this is Florida, where there has been some really great work, and then it goes away because it gets banned by the government. So there's the link in the chat. And again, feel free, again, answer for your programs. All right, I got to speed up. Principles of this work are another thing that we think through. So similar to values or principles, however you want to define them. When we're working with survivors, when we're working with anti-violence organizations, survivor support organizations, these are some of the things that we bring to that. It's believe survivors, believe them about their experiences of violence, believe them about their gender, about their lives, about what they're telling you. Recognize connections, connections that people have with each other, how to help healing and building connections, and connections between issues and movements. We are all interconnected in this world, and that is a good and beautiful thing. And then create a culture of care. So care is beautiful and valuable, and we want to put caring for each other and caring for this world kind of at the center of the work that we do, and get grounded in that. And that helps us to approach things from a trauma-informed lens. Hatching spot. Some other aspects of healing that we're going to bring into this work are safety and stabilization. So when you're working with folks who've experienced trauma, often trauma can destabilize us if we have stability to begin with, and make the world feel less safe. The world, our relationships, our bodies, all of that feel less safe. So when we're supporting healing and engaging in healing activities, we want to look for what feels safer. How can we move towards safety, and how can we move towards stabilization? This doesn't mean everything has to be rigid and the same all the time. That's not stability. It's just like, if you can see the picture, it's a bunch of rocks balanced on top of each other. So it's, how are we finding kind of more of a sense of balance and grounding? How can we process the feelings that are happening? Unfortunately, sometimes like basic skills around grounding activities or around handling your feelings may keep people from processing them, because it's like, oh gosh, I felt afraid. I need to get grounded and feel safe right away. That sometimes we need to do that because that's the safest thing for us. That's what our bodies need. Sometimes we need time to actually feel the feelings so that it can move through us. And so figuring out strategies to grieve, to be angry, to be scared in ways that feel, that are safe for people to do. And reconnecting and finding wholeness. This has again been really named as valuable, especially in a lot of work that's been done around racial and cultural trauma, is that finding that sense of connection to ourselves, our cultures, our identities and communities, is a really important part of healing from trauma. So when we're working with trans and non-binary people, we may, have conversations about what community means to them, how their sense of community and connection, how their sense of themselves or their gender has been impacted by violence, and thinking through what they want to do about that. When folks, do find some sense of like pride or joy in their identities. People talk about gender euphoria sometimes, or glimmers, these moments of like, yes, this feels good and right, and affirmation. Those can help us reconnect. So that's something we can look for when we're working with survivors. Uh, Also, when working with survivors, we want to acknowledge the harm of hate violence. Even if that's not the primary thing that somebody is coming to talk to you about or work with you around, acknowledging that like stuff sucks real bad, that it's scary, that what happened to them is harmful, and it is okay to be impacted by that. It's normal. We want to take this into consideration in our safety planning, recognizing that, a lot of options that may be working for non-trans survivors won't work for trans survivors because they're not safe. Get creative about resources. We don't need to fit services into like a checklist or a set of boxes. We need to design services that work for the individual. and work to demonstrate that our organization is a safe place. So again, thinking about what does the building look like? What does it feel like? Is it safe to get to? Are people treated well by all of the staff the whole time they're there? All of those things go into demonstrating safety. Um, in practice, so safety planning, you mentioned getting creative. Some things you might say be, I know there's been an increase in anti-trans protests and harassment around town. I'm wondering if you would find it helpful to update your safety plan. You might say, before you were alternating your bus routes. How does that feel for you? Is that still a safe option? Right. We know a lot of folks are reporting that they're experiencing harassment in public transportation. So bringing that awareness into your conversation, even if somebody hasn't brought it up, check back in. um, and say, did the things we talked about before, do they still work? Can we get creative? Can we funnel some different resources your way? Because ride shares and buses aren't an option for trans folks in our area. How can we get you safe transportation? So get creative. Other things that are really important are just continuing to support our staff, recognizing, we have trans and non-binary staff. We have staff that love and care about trans and non-binary people. We have staff that are empathetic. We have staff that are impacted by trauma. And so we want to show support for them. We want to help keep them safe and, proactively try to prevent harassment and hostility towards our staff. We want to have spaces where people can say, this sucks. And open up these conversations about what's happening in the world, whether it's acknowledging it during staff meetings, checking in during supervision, while knowing that you're giving people the option to not talk about it at work. And be flexible. When your staff are going through it, they may need different types of support. They may need a change in their schedules. I know, something we've done is just chat with each other. Like, I was supposed to moderate social media today, and y'all, I can't handle it. Can someone help me, please? Like that flexibility has been really important for us. And so finding out what you can do at your agency. Also create meaningful workplace policies for inclusion. Part of being trauma informed is taking care of our staff, which means our staff are paid well enough to have their needs met. They get health care. They have time off so they can use that health care. It's really creating those same ideas, having safety and transparency in our supervision process, all of that for staff. And engage with partners and funders. So it's not just our agencies, it's everybody we work with, our board of directors, everyone else. And we want them to know that we value our staff. We value having an inclusive staff. We're proud that we hire trans and non-binary people and that we stand against hate. You may need to tailor the language depending on, who your partners are, but being able to do some of that stuff proactively can do a lot for the workplace environment to prevent harassment in the first place, because people already know where you stand. And then communicate. So particularly as agencies, we might be communicating outward about hate violence, harassment, about policies, legislation, changes in services due to those things, or how we're not changing services. We may also be communicating just like through social media, through our outreach efforts. So not just agency-wide, but like for those of you who table at events and things like that. Consider what details you share with who and why. We have again, like I've shared with y'all, this is being recorded, and we've posted some on social media about experiencing hate, but we've been thoughtful about like, we don't want people to be afraid to come to our social media. Please don't be afraid to come to our social media. There's amazing stuff there. We moderate it. But thinking about like, who needs information to be able to do meaningful risk assessments. So who needs to know if there are, threats or risks or things like that? Who needs to know what we're going through just so they like can care about us and send us hearts? Why are we sharing things is really important. And that's stuff that we can think about in our work. Emphasize possibilities, actions, and tools for safety. So again, when we're talking about all of this yuck, the giant pile of garbage before it became a beautiful compost heap that's going to nourish our gardens, we want to emphasize that good things are possible too. Trans joy is a huge part of our lives. Trans people are doing amazing stuff. And that healing is possible, that action is possible, and that there are tools for safety as well. So one example here, Forge has been collecting responses to hate. So while we are also tracking like all of the yuck, what we've been doing publicly is sharing all of these examples of cool things people are doing to say like trans people are great and should have rights. And that's just been shared in the chat, so you can check those out. And we've tried to like create a wide range of kind of actions that we share. Draw connections between issues. We are not in a silo as trans folks. Trans folks do not live single issue lives. No one does. And our lives are very, very integrally connected to other systems of oppression, to racism, classism, ableism, and more. As well, we know things like hate violence is connected to sexual violence, is connected to gun violence, and all of that's connected to climate change and fascism and all of this stuff. We may not necessarily share every single thing in every single communication, but we're building in those connections in the work we do and the way we communicate. And we can also do that with survivors by recognizing their whole lives and not just limiting them to talking about one type of violence in our work, but being able to talk about also like how it's tiring to be a mom, or how housing prices are really scary right now, or like all this other stuff. And then finally, learn about disinformation and ways to address it. There's sadly a lot of intentionally wrong information being spread, as well as unintentionally wrong misinformation. And we want to have skills so that we're not resharing things that are lies, and we're also able to kind of proactively stop some of the hateful messages that are being spread. All right. So that's place for pause. I haven't given y'all a ton of chances to ask questions yet. So what are you thinking about? Share in the chat questions you have, ideas you have, inspirations. I'm going to check the Q&A while y'all do that. Takes a while to type, so that you don't have to do it in silence. This is our social media. Please follow us. We moderate the hate. I've said that a lot now. We post all of our recorded webinars on our YouTube page. We've got awesome fun TikToks as well as Instagram and Facebook. There's our website. And if you're not familiar, we have a blog and set of resources for trans survivors as well. Anyone can go there, but often the writing is intended for trans folks. I have learned a ton from these organizations and brought those learnings into this webinar today. So Movement Advancement Project, We Make the Future, and SAMHSA. And you can learn more from us by checking out our upcoming events, including more webinars specifically looking at hate violence and some of the connections there, and that responses to hate link I shared earlier. You can email me. Let's talk. Let's see if we've gotten any questions or comments in the chat yet. Michael, did anything come through that I've missed?
I don't see anything in the chat, and I don't see anything in the Q&A.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here today, for all that you shared in the chat, for helping support yourselves and each other. We really appreciate you and your work. I'll stick around for a minute or two in case questions are bubbling up, but otherwise y'all are free to head out. Thanks again, and we'll see you at more of these in the future. Take care.